OpenShift from Red Hat comes in two flavors. One is Community Edition we call OKD, and second is Enterprise Edition we call OCP or OpenShift Container Platform. Within OCP, you can deploy it on two different ways. One is Managed OpenShift, where Red Hat is going to manage the installation and setup, which can be done on either AWS Cloud, Azure Cloud, or Red Hat IBM Cloud. Second flavor of that enterprise edition of OpenShift, which is OCP, OpenShift Container Platform, you can do it on unmanaged setup, or we call try it yourself or do it yourself, where you as a customer can will be deploying that OpenShift. That OpenShift can be deployed either on AWS Cloud, Azure Cloud, Google Cloud, or any platform agnostic cloud or on-premise setup. Now, what are these two different options? Or within that unmanaged or within that try it yourself, you further have two different installer types. One is called as user provision infrastructure, where you as a user is setting up infrastructure. And another flavor is the installer provision infrastructure we call IPI or UPI. Now, what these options are of installation and how do you deploy a OpenShift cluster using step-by-step instructions on the cloud or AWS cloud using a unmanaged or installer provision infrastructure. I'm going to cover all this in this video. Hi, this is Atul from team K21 Academy, where we help you in your journey to learn containers, Kubernetes, and OpenShift on cloud and on-premise. So just to give you some background about this video, we run a OpenShift training program, and in that training program, we have around 30 plus hands-on lab. And when I requested or asked my group which or what exactly they want to learn, and one thing was coming out is how do we set up the cluster. So we have around 3 or 4 guides or different ways to deploying these clusters. From that, I picked up one of the lab on deploying and a OpenShift cluster using a unmanaged cluster on AWS Cloud. So that has around 7 videos. So we picked up that entire lab, and so when you're watching this video, you might have some references or some lessons or something about the program. So skip or ignore that part. But what we have done is all the 7 lessons we've combined. My team have combined them, and that's what coming in this. So watch this, and there'll be step-by-step instructions on how to achieve and set up an OpenShift cluster on cloud. You can use the same step to deploy it on-premise as well. So try it out, and towards end of this class, if you like this, I would invite you for a free approximately 2 hours class where we teach you how to learn OpenShift from complete beginner to the becoming an expert and getting certified and get a higher paid job. So listen what we're talking about, or watch this, and let me know if you have any questions. If anything is not clear, leave it in the comment. With that, let's hear out this installation process.
Hey there, this is Atul from team K21 Academy, and in this module we are going to talk about how to install and configure a multi-node OpenShift cluster, but this time we are going to use run it yourself. And within run it yourself, we'll be using user provision infrastructure, and the platform that you're going to bring it is on AWS. Now, if you have done some of any other OpenShift installer by following one of our other videos, other modules, you might be confused what exactly we are doing or what is this different from other OpenShift cluster that we've installed. So let me first give you the background. And that will be especially important if you're coming it here directly on the first time. If you've already seen OpenShift installation other videos, or if you've understood the theory, probably you might understand. But let me first guide you for coming directly to this video. So first of all, this video, what this guide is, as I said, installing the OpenShift cluster, enterprise level of cluster, multi-node one, but using run it yourself, using within that run it yourself user provision infrastructure on AWS cloud. So to understand it better, first there are 2 types of OpenShift. One is community edition, we also call as origin Kubernetes distribution. They don't use origin Kubernetes word because of the copyright issues with CNCF, but behind the scene, it's ultimately the Kubernetes engine that's running. So it's OKD, which is a community edition in simple terms. Then there is a OCP, which is an enterprise edition, also known as OpenShift Container Platform OCP. So this guide, we are going to do OpenShift Container, and somewhere in this program, we already have another module where we talk about OKD, how to install and configure OKD, and then run the and then on top of that we deploy application. That videos should already be available. So but in this particular module we're going to talk about how to install and configure OpenShift Container Platform. Now within that OpenShift Enterprise Edition there are two deployment types. One we call managed service, which means it will be managed by, you still configure it once, but that it will be managed by Red Hat. So it's called a managed service, which can be deployed on AWS or Azure or IBM Cloud, as you see for this here. Other option is run it yourself, and in running yourself, which means you are going to manage this cluster. Though you can attach it, you can view it from the Red Hat console as well on OpenShift console as you do in managed services. But here you run it, and this can be done either on AWS or it can be deployed on Azure. It could be deployed on Google, or it could be platform agnostic, which means you can run it anywhere. You can run it in on-premise, you can do in virtual vSphere, etc. Now, when we cover theory, we'll go a little bit deeper into these. But for now, this particular lab, it should be more than enough. So in this guide, we are going to run it yourself within AWS Cloud. Now, ARM, you might be confused. What are the two AWS ARM? AWS and AWS ARM. So this is on the underlying virtual machine. When you deploy the CPUs, CPU processor can be x86 or it could be ARM architecture for the processors. So when you normally it's x86, but now OpenShift is also deploying on AWS ARM. You can deploy that type, but we're going to do it on AWS, not AWS ARM. ARM machines are slightly cheaper, and they are more suited for developers, your developer or development team, where you don't have you're okay with ARM type architecture. But again, we're going to do it on ARM. Now, within that, you have installation type. One is IPI, which is installer provision infrastructure, where installer is going to do everything for you. Or you can deploy user provision infrastructure, where you as a user will be installing things and underlying. I'll explain very briefly, but as I said, inside the theory, when we cover in the session in the theory, we'll explain a little bit better in the presentations when we cover that, or you should have already watched that. So within installer provision infrastructure, what happens is that Red Hat is going to deploy and manage everything. So Red Hat is going to deploy if you have seen architecture, there's a control plane, there's infra plane, and there's a worker nodes. And sometimes worker node and infra node are used commonly. You can deploy in one single node as well, or one single machine as well. So the control plane will always be Red Hat Enterprise Linux Core OS and cloud resources. All the cloud resources like underlying, if you're deploying on, you will need a storage, networking, etc. And same is worker node will also be Red Hat Enterprise Linux Core OS. And then on top of that, you run OCP cluster and then OCP cluster resources. So everything is managed by Red Hat, and the underlying everything is basically, and then underlying operating system will be Red Hat Enterprise Linux Core OS. Whereas in user provision infrastructure, you as a customer, or you as a administrator or as an architect or developer will deploy the underlying infrastructure, which means operating system, or networking or storage, or the load balancer, etc. So you take care of infrastructure, though from a user management point of view. Now, what happens is, in that particular case, the worker node can be Red Hat Enterprise Linux, or worker node can be Core OS, any of those. But the master node will always be Core OS. And then, so whatever is mentioned in the gray here, that is user managed. Red one is the OpenShift cluster managed. So in this particular case, we are going to do the user provision. Now, in the managed one, I said earlier, managed services, you have an option called Red Hat OpenShift Service on AWS, ROSA. You should have already done that. There's a separate module about how to deploy a managed Kubernetes using ROSA. So we have already done that, or you should already have seen that. So this is in a nutshell about, oh yeah, and then you can deploy either it on a cloud like AWS, Azure, Google, or IBM, or you can do it on any physical or virtual machines, physical bare metal or virtual machines. You can deploy wherever you want. So in this case, we are going to deploy it on AWS. This is all in a nutshell we are going to do. Now, this is the architecture. We'll cover that in more in depth in the theory part. And again, this is a underlying setup that happens behind the scene. Again, we'll cover that when we go in the theory part for this. But this is all happening for you behind the scene for you on the setup. And what installer does is installer will create a temporary bootstrap node. Again, you don't need to worry about this is all happening behind the scene for you, but it creates a temporary bootstrap machine. That bootstrap machine will in turn set up the 3 controller nodes, and that controller node will in turn then deploy the worker node and infra node and so on. So this is again will happen for you behind the scene. You will not even notice that, but as they happen, some machines will terminate. I'll show it to you when we go into. Now, just to give you some little bit background about what you're going to learn in this particular, or like everything that we are going to do in this lab, we'll first have explained you the introduction about what we are going to do and what are the options available. Then chapter number 2 is about documentation, what documentation you can refer or we have referred. Now, we're going to create a free DNS account or domain name service so that my OpenShift, because I'm going to do everything, so I need a domain name server, I need a load balancer or Route 53 and so on. And some things we'll let installer do it for us. So all those steps or the documentation we've used, you can refer there. Now, if you go up on here, further, these are the prerequisite. What all the prerequisite you should already have. So we should already have a prerequisite as a AWS account. We should also have a subscription account, and if you already have subscription account, you should be you can skip this part and use that subscription which you already have. We did it in one of the other modules when we did AWS ROSA or when we did OKD. So if you've done any of that, I'm assuming you already have a Red Hat developer account, you can use that developer account. So we'll talk about developer account as we move forward. Then if you go further down, we'll be creating a free domain name. Now you can, if you already have a domain name from GoDaddy or etc., you can use that, or if not, we'll show you how to create a free domain name for a year. Then you're going to register for the DNS entry for the name server. So this DNS you have used, we are going to create something called as a Route 53, which is a name server which we get from, or the IPs that we get for the load balancers or the domain name server from Red Hat, so that this URL that we're going to create are publicly available. So that as you proceed, you will see that. So we're going to register the DNS entries with the domain name that we have configured that we got earlier here in this lesson. Then we are going to create a EC2 machine. EC2 is nothing but Elastic Compute Cloud, which is a virtual machine on AWS. We are going to create a Linux type virtual machine. On that virtual machine, we'll download all our installer because we need some installer from Red Hat to install these software. So we'll do that into this EC2 machine. We also need we'll also show you how to connect using PuTTY. And then we'll be installing. So this is what we will create a machine and then connect to this machine. Later on this machine, in order to install the OpenShift, on that machine, we'll be needing AWS CLI, a command line interface again, but this time we're going to do it on Linux. If you followed ROSA or how to do the automated build or managed service build on AWS cloud of OpenShift, if you've done that module, you already know this step. But in that module, we did on Windows. Here, we are going to do it on Linux machine. We'll configure CLI, and then we'll configure the AWS instance CLI, AWS CLI on the EC2 instance. Once this is done, then we are going to set up the cluster using the using a user provision infrastructure or UPI, they say. And for that, you need some work to be done, which is you generate some key pair so that the machine, this EC2 machine where the OpenShift cluster is done, can connect to other machines of your master node and worker node and so on. You'll be obtaining or downloading the installation software for OpenShift. You'll install OpenShift command line interface on Linux, and then we'll create the configuration files through which you're going to deploy the OpenShift cluster. Then you'll be installing the OpenShift cluster in this chapter, and then finally you'll be logging on to the cluster on CLI. We'll be logging in and checking from both CLI command line interface as well as the web console as well. And then we'll be checking the cluster log file if behind the scene here. Finally, we'll wrap it up by deleting the OpenShift cluster, because if your cluster is running or if you don't use them, especially the DNS might be charged. If you don't use it, so we'll be deleting the DNS entries from Route 53, and we'll be terminating this EC2 instance as well and other cluster machines as well. So that all we are going to cover in a nutshell in this module. So yeah, so head on to the next lesson. If you have any questions, doubts, complete all the videos and then things will become clear. I'm assuming you already have an AWS account. If not, follow the module 0 or module first one of the previous modules. In that we have shown you step-by-step procedure to install AWS Cloud. Next, we are going to do it is the subscribe to the Red Hat account. So if you have followed that guide, if you have followed that subscription to Red Hat, or you already have a Red Hat developer account, you can skip this part. If you don't have, then or the next lesson you skip that. If you already have the developer account, if you don't have a developer account, then head on to the next lesson where we'll be talking about developer account. If not, straight head on to the next module, which is about registering a domain name. So we'll be talking about how to register for that a domain name. We'll be looking into this domain name. So I'll see you on registering a free domain name. We'll also need a EC2 machine, which will be covering later part in later subsequent sections about EC2. So I'll see you in next lesson talking about the how to register for a Red Hat developer account, and after that we'll head on to the next part, which is registering a domain name for free. So I'll see you in subsequent lesson. Now, next is you're subscribing to the Red Hat developer account. So in order for you to go to the developer account, if you already have a Red Hat developer account, you can use that. But if you don't, I'm going to share you how do you create how do you subscribe to this Red Hat developer account. You will need an email address, and that should be enough. So we'll create a Red Hat developer account. So in order to subscribe to this Red Hat developer account, we need to go this URL developers.redhat.com. So I'll open a browser and enter this developers.redhat.com. And then we need to go and scroll down. At the bottom of this page, you will have a button which says join the Red Hat developer button. So we'll click on that, and then we'll provide or select a Red Hat login ID and email address and all the details it needs. Now make sure that you remember this, choose the Red Hat login. I'll show you otherwise when we come to this, when we need this later, I'll come back to you and show you where this Red Hat login ID is available. So this is I'm on a developers.redhat.com. Scroll down and keep going down, and you will see a page like this, which says at the bottom Cloud Native Developer Career Training, and say join Red Hat Developer. Click on this, and on this page you will be choosing a Red Hat login ID. So I'll select a K21 Academy, something which is not being used, and usually my team uses these. So I'll say 2021 or K21 Academy Atul 21. And then I'll need to provide my email address. Now, so then you select the job role, choose a password of your choice. Now you select here, I have read and agreed terms and conditions. Now, if you want to receive any email notification called opt-ins, or you can select this. If you don't want any email notification related to developer service, you can uncheck it and click on create my account. Now, once this account is being created, we need to go to the customer portal. On here, we need to make sure we log in and click on customer portal. Now, one thing we also need to do is we need to go to our inbox. We should have received an email from Red Hat. So like that, no reply, verify your email or Red Hat account and open this email and click on this link, and that will verify the account. It's important that you need to verify or you verify this account. Now, once this is done, we go back to the portal and make sure that we can log in here. So click on login. And because I think you've already verified, it might automatically take you back onto the page. And now I've logged in my account. You go to this customer portal here on top left, and then you need to select what type of account it is. Is it a corporate account or a personal account? Now, if you're testing, if you're doing it for your company, you might select a corporate account. Most of the students that you are probably are doing it for a personal level, so you select personal, but it doesn't matter. You can check it. You can pick one of these. Now, this is important, as I said, when later I'll be needing this K21 Academy Atul 21. We'll use that later. And we'll be creating a password again here. Select all the contact details, the country from where you belong. I'm not giving my correct address right now here. I'll put my company address here. City. Now you need to enter your phone number. Now this number is a dummy number, so please again don't use this phone number. Click on submit, and there's some errors it's asking me. So I need to put an address more than one characters. So my address should have at least few characters in this. So you fix that problem and hit submit again. So hit submit. And now once you've submitted, you go back to the subscriptions again here. And you make sure that you see one active subscription, and this is important. So otherwise you will hit problem later when we configure our Red Hat Linux machine or try to subscribe or link it to this account. If this is not active subscription is not there, you will hit problem on downloading the latest software. So just to do a quick recap, what we have done is we've joined a Red Hat developer account. We created a first account. We verified the email address. And then when we went into the customer portal and verified or selected the account details, and we have verified that we have one active subscription. This is important that I have an active subscription here. I can quickly go back and see. I'll see the active subscription number here as well. Here. Hey there, welcome back. Let's continue from where we left earlier. We were earlier doing about in this lab about explain to you what we are going to cover in this particular lab, and also then I'm assuming you already have now the Red Hat developer account. If you already had, you could have used, or you could use. I'm assuming you're using that. If not, you've already created a Red Hat developer account. Now, next we are going to do is register a domain name. Now, this domain name, let's suppose whatever name you want to call your, like you're going to access your applications in or cluster. That's what we need to register. Now, you can use tools like GoDaddy or any other domain name like server. Or you can use a free service. So we're going to cover that. And then after that, we'll be creating a EC2 in the next lesson. But for here, right now, we're creating a domain name. And for the domain name, we will be using a service called Freenome. So what you're going to do is you go to Freenome and then search for any name like this demo k21academy.tk might be used. Maybe you can say put a timestamp or something like that, which will be, I'll show you what I've already done or I'll show you one more time, or we'll create one more. So we'll do demo k21.tk or demo k21, and then best would be YYMM. So like 2021 or 2109 something, or 2102 or 22, whenever you're watching this, you time, so that it's unique basically. And then you simply say whatever is available, click on select that and say checkout. And then you get, I think, couple of months, 3 months or 12 months, they might keep changing that. So 12 months free. And then you continue, create an account on this, and you'll get an email verification, verify your email, and you should have that checkout. Enter your details, it will be free, absolutely free. And then you provide your contact details, etc. And then you will have the domain name ready. And now this domain name we'll be using later, or I'll cover that in Route 53. So we'll be creating a Route 53. Route 53 is nothing but a DNS domain name service registration from AWS. AWS will give us a three IPs. Those IPs should be added here within this Freenome service. So that's what, and once it might be confusing if you have not done it, but if you see my video and if you do it, then it will become much more clear to you. So we have got the domain name, but this domain name we have not got the IPs. This name should be mapped to an IP. So once we have got the domain name, we are going to go to the AWS, we'll go to Route 53 and we'll say I'm mapping these IPs. So whatever name you have used, and you need to remember that multiple places the same name you need to use. So we've created a name in your Freenom. Then we are going to create a here the hosted zone, or this is configured using zones or DNS zones. So you'll be creating a hosted zone in Route 53, and then you'll be putting the same domain name that you have picked up earlier in Freenome, and it'll be marked as a public hosted zone because we want it to be accessible from the public. And then you will get values. We'll select the values. We'll say create hosted zone, and you'll get some names here. On when you click on this, you'll get this value record, value name. You need to pick this name, value name here, and then you're going to go to the domains in your Freenome. Now you're going on to Freenome. Under domains, you will have the manage domains. Under the management tools, you will go to the management tool and you select a name server. In that name server, you'll be saying use the custom name server, and whatever name you got from AWS, you'll be putting it here. So this free nome will be publicly distributed to all the domain name across the globe on within 24 hours. Usually it's 1 or 2 hours. Within 1 or 2 hours it should be, but on a safer side 24 hours. But we should be, we have checked, we've never had to wait 24 hours. So maybe within couple of 1 or 2 hours you should have the name server ready. And then this name server, whenever that name anyone you type from anywhere in the world, like for example we have picked up K21 OpenShift.tk, if you type, that will result to these names onto the AWS. That's how the request goes from this free nome to the, which is a domain name service provider, which we're giving 1 year free. There we take it to the AWS. In AWS we got the name, and now AWS knows that request has come. That will in turn forward it to the application load balancer, which we'll see later on. And that's how the architecture is going to go. So by DNS, free nome redirected to the Route 53 on AWS. That Route 53 then in turn forwarded to the application load balancer, which will be created when we do the next setup. So let me show it to you by going to, and then make sure that you have this ready before we go on to the next one. So we go to the Freenome. So we'll go to the website and then type freenome.com. And then there, and I've already logged into the machine on the Freenome account, so I may not have to come to that stage, but it will be self-explanatory, like it's creating or registering a free Gmail account or something like that, or an email account. So here I'm going to use K21 Academy OpenShift, and maybe I'll say 2109 and see if it's available. And I can say it's available. I can pick one of them, and I'm picking TK. You can pick ML or something. So I'll say .tk and say get it now. And when you say get it now, it will say not available. And that's something a little bit funny. So we'll go to sign in. I've already registered on this account. So now sometime I've noticed is like once I've logged in, that time initially it says was not available, but I've logged in again, and now the K21 Academy OpenShift 2109.tk, I can see now it's available, or I can see. So sometime it takes, I don't know why, sometime it takes funny, or maybe it was at the bottom. So let me log out again. Just wanted to see what was the case here, because I think I should have scrolled down and it should have given me that option. So let me try one more time on freenom.com. Yeah, so if I do again, so I first initially tried without logging in and it's saying free and it was not available. Then I logged in and I was able to see. So I'm just again doing the same thing. K21 Academy OpenShift. I just wanted to see that you should not hit the same problem or act funny. So you click on check availability and it'll say it's free. And if I say get it now, it says not available. But if you scroll down, or I've logged in and it worked. So that's a little bit funny. So you can say sign in or register here or something like that. So if I now say sign in and I'm using my Gmail, and then now again go back to the Freenome, though I already have some Freenome account here, but I wanted to say search for one more time freenom. So rather than my freenom, so I'll say freenom.com. So now I'm searching one final time. So hopefully it should K21 Academy OpenShift. And this is because we do AWS program and we notice that some like you need to there is a particular way in which you get it. So in this case, may say 2109. I'm trying to do the same thing which was available K21 Academy OpenShift 2109. So say check availability. So here you say get it now. And now you got a zero. So I hope you understand now. So check out. So maybe try that out. Maybe you log in. We'll check the steps as well. So now we'll say that it's saying me 3 months free or 5 months free up to 12 months free. So I'll select a 12 months free and say continue from here from the drop down. And now I need to remember you need to do and say complete the order. I've read the terms and conditions and you say complete the order. And now the order number and you go to the client area. Sorry, the client area might be, I think you simply say logged in and say services here, and you can say my domain or the domain that you've created will be listed here. I've done it quite a few. So this is the one which I'm going to do in this training, which is K21 Academy OpenShift 2109. You can use a different name, 21010, or maybe something else number at the back, which may not have used by someone. And later we'll be going on to the manage domain name. This is a place where we go onto the manage domain name and we'll say that the domain is active. Under management tool, we'll go to the name server, and this is where we'll be changing to use the custom name. But what that is, we're going to get it from the Route 53. So what is Route 53? Basically, it's a domain name service. I'll show it to you here. First of all, we'll be going to, or I'll say Route 53. So you click on Route 53, which is a domain name registration. So whatever domain name registered, we'll be using that onto the public domain. We have configured the public domain, but we have not generated the name server. And that is come using some DNS management service. So I already have a one hosted zone. I'll explain that hosted zone. This is what we need to create. So as a part of this, I created a hosted zone, and that's what you'll be creating, that hosted zone, which is Paria TW, whatever. Maybe I should be deleting that. I don't need that hosted zone anymore now. So that was something maybe someone in my team created that. So we'll delete that. Now what happens is, so you'll be going on to and you'll say that create a hosted zone. I'll explain that in a minute. But just to give you the pricing, you don't pay anything upfront. All you pay is a one time or like 50 cents per hosted zone for first 25 zones, which means because we are creating the first zone, we'll be charged for 50 cents. After that, for if you create a second hosted zone, you'll get another 50 cents. So it's quite cheap. And then later, it's like only per queries, but then we are hardly going to use that. So we'll not even hit that limit. So we'll be charged only 50 cents. So just wanted to make you aware that there'll be a slight charge on 50 cents on here. So once now we're going to ready to create a hosted zone. So if you go here, we have registered the domain name. We have, and first time if you're doing it, maybe you have to enable your email, etc. So just follow the process, which is quite simple. Now we're going to do the Route 53, and we'll be saying create a hosted zone. And hosted zone, the name we're going to use is exactly the same as what we have used here. So we'll say create a hosted zone and our domain name, and that should match with what we have used here, which is K21 Academy OpenShift 2109.tk. So I've used here, and I go here, and this is my domain name, and we'll say that for OpenShift cluster user managed, and I'm going to use a public hosted, and we say that create a hosted zone, and that it's that simple on. So now I got this here on a simple record. So we'll say name server. There's a name server and SOA. We're going to use the name server NS, and these are the entries we're going to pick it from here. And we need to be careful. We need to put also the dot at the end. So we went into the managed domain name and we go to the domain name server. I'll show it to you one more time. And I just want to double check. I don't think, yeah, we don't need to use on here. Um, we'll be using without a dot here. Um, Now this is, yeah, we'll be using till here. So I'm going to go back and show to you where to configure that. So you go under services section and say my domains, and then the domain that you've configured, click under say manage domain. And in that domain, manage domain, you go to the management tools and say name server. This is where you need to go and select use a custom name server and you put here. And I think you'll be, yeah. And then you'll be putting second entry as this one, name server, this one, and third entry as this one, and fourth entry as this one. And then say change name server. So we are using, if anyone comes to these name server, or like if anyone goes to now K21 Academy, my OpenShift 2109.tk, it will then be redirected to, because we have done the name server here, pointing to AWS, it'll go to the AWS now. And that is the task we've done. We've successfully created and this. Perform these and let my team know if you need any further help on this. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next lesson. We'll be talking about how launching a Linux machine on EC2, and then we'll be connecting to this machine, and this machine will be used. This is a T2 Micro, and if you're under a free tier account, there'll be no charge as long as you shut down the machine that you are using, that you're creating. So but anyway, I'll cover all this in the next lesson. So head on to the next lesson where we talk about creating a Linux machine that will be used to download our OpenShift software, and then we're going to run our OpenShift software from that machine. So I'll see you in next lesson. Hey there, welcome back. This is Atul from Team K21 Academy, and in this lesson, we're going to talk about launching an Linux EC2 instance, which is nothing but Elastic Compute Cloud, which is in the not simple terms, it's a virtual machine. This virtual machine will be of Linux type. We'll be using this virtual machine to download the OpenShift software. We'll use it to create a OpenShift cluster, other machines to which will be hosting my OpenShift cluster. So this is kind of a staging area or machine with a staging area, all the software, etc. So first we are going to go to, you select a region, which is North Virginia. In my case, we'll be using that US East one, and we'll be selecting a EC2. And from here, we'll be going and say launch an instance. Under instances, we'll say launch the instance. And here we are going to select a shape or a image of Amazon Linux. So we'll be selecting a 64-bit Amazon Linux, which I'll show you here. And the shape we are selecting is T2 Micro, because T2 Micro is free. It's a single vCPU, 1 gig of memory, and it's absolutely free for a free trial account. If you're doing a free trial account, you get free. But when you say free, you only get 720 hours in a month, which is like enough 720, like a lot of time in a month. So you will be getting first 720 hours when machine is up. If you shut down and only use maybe 100 hours, that should be more than enough. You will not charge up to 720 minutes. So make sure that after this task, you shut down this machine, and maybe not delete it, because in future we might create these clusters of subsequent clusters. So we will delete the cluster and cluster machines, but we'll not delete this machine because it's going to be free. I'll explain that. If you want to delete it, you can delete it free, just peace of mind, and we can quickly recreate it. So we'll use the default storage, and then we'll put we'll give the details about one, and then we'll use a default network, which is VPC, and the public subnet, so that we can access this remotely from our laptop. And another thing, when we are adding the storage, we'll make sure that we'll say that delete on termination, which means there'll be two parts. One is the machine, and then second part is underlying storage with that. And you can, so what we are saying here is that when you delete the machine, then make sure that underlying storage is also deleted. So we'll checkbox this, or it should be there, and we'll put a tag. and we'll tag in saying that name as web, instead of web server, I might put a different name. So we'll change, look into that. And then we'll be looking at configuring a security group. And in that security group, which is nothing but a firewall, in that firewall, we'll be opening a port number 22. That port number 22 is basically for SSH or connection through PuTTY. We'll also be using port number 80 from internet, and we might be using later this port number 80. So we'll open these two ports, and later if you want, you can create other ports as well. Now we are going to create a key pair, and that key pair will be used to connect to this machine. So earlier, I think if I'm not wrong, in one of the other modules, we created a Windows machine that has a key pair. So you can either use that, but I'll be on the simple terms, we'll create a new key pair, which is Linux key pair. And this key pair will be used to connect to this machine, this Linux machine later, and I'll show you how do you connect that. And once this key pair is here, machine is there, we'll check, verify that machine is up and running, and then we'll access it from either browser console or from EC2 instance using PuTTY. So we'll share both the steps. And once that's done, then we are ready to do the AWS configuration, which we'll cover in next lesson. So let's quickly go here and create and show it to you how to create this EC2 machines for you. So we go to the AWS. You've already created an account earlier. So we go to and search for here EC2. And here I'm selected a US East one. Just for simplicity, you can pick anyone. It's preferred to keep the US one, US East one. So I'll click here, make sure your tab instance is selected. We'll say launch instance. So launch instance, we're creating an instance now of virtual machine of EC2, which is Elastic Compute Cloud. Now we are selecting Amazon Linux, and we are using x86. We are not using ARM template or ARM architecture. We're using x86, and this is what we said at the start, that we'll be using. On my clusters are going to be created. OpenShift clusters will also use x86. Select here. Now we are going to select here the instance type. We'll be picking up T2 Micro, which is a free tier. You get one vCPU, as I said. So next is configure instance detail. We'll use number of instances, like how many VMs, one only. We'll use network default, everything default, subnet, everything, we'll keep it default here, and click on add storage. Now you're saying 8 gig, you get, I think, 10 or 30 gig free per month. And we'll say delete or termination, so that when machine is deleted, this storage, which is 8 gig of storage, which is attached to this disk, is also deleted. Click on add a tag. We'll put a tag and say name, and we'll say OpenShift staging area, OpenShift shift staging VM. Okay, and then we'll say security group, and this is where we'll be adding a security group. So let me see, you can pick any name, but let me see if we've used a K21 Academy Web DMZ. It doesn't need to be written in that way. I think we have picked up from one of our other AWS labs. So we're probably using K21 Academy Web DMZ. So 22 port number is already open. We'll be adding one more port number 80. You may not even need it, but it's if in case we need to access this machine over the port number 80, then we'll use it. Click on review and launch, and click on launch. Now this is where you're saying if you already have a key pair in this region, so you can have one or multiple key pairs in a region, but one is mandatory when you create an instance. So in North Virginia, we don't have a key, so we're going to use and say create a new key pair, and we'll give a saying that I'll say OpenShift client machine, or something like the OpenShift client machine or whatever. And then we'll download the key pair and make sure that you save this key pair. It's important, and we'll use that key pair later. We'll convert if you're connecting from Windows machine, which we will do. Then you can use to we will be converting that. I'll show it a little bit later, this part. How do you use this key to connect from to machine through PuTTY? There is another method. We'll show that as well, a simple method. So here we'll say launch instance, and that will take few minutes to start, and the machine will be up. And once the machine is up, we'll say the status is initializing, and then you say 222 checks, then we are done. Then we are going to connect this machine, and this machine can be connected from the SSH connection, browser connection will connect and show it to you. And then later, you also have another option to connect using PuTTY. So we'll show you the PuTTY as well. In order for you to connect from PuTTY, you need to download some steps, or sorry, download the PuTTY. If you've already done it in one of the previous other modules, you can skip this part, downloading PuTTY and configuring. But you need to do the PuTTY gen. And because you've done the new keys now, you will need to generate the keys which will cover, and you will need to do the PPK file. All those things will be covered in the subsequent or in a little bit later part in this video. And using this PuTTY, we'll be connecting. So you have two options to connect. One is through the browser of AWS itself or through PuTTY. And once this is done, then we'll be ready to configure our CLI or this machine with AWS CLI, which we'll do in the next lesson. So the machine, if you go to and say view instance, here you say that T2 micro is running. Right now it's initializing. That means you should be having to check number 222. So wait for a few minutes. I've already got the machines here, this IP, and then you can connect using from here and say connect. And you have different methods, EC2 instance connect. This is the IP. You have session manager. You have SSH client and serial console. Serial console will be if the machine doesn't boot up. Again, we go in our AWS solution architecture new program deep into this. But the machine is still not up, and or we can connect here, instance connect detail, and say connect here. And we are now connecting in the browser itself. So you don't need any PuTTY or everything. You can just work from here. So as well. So we are giving you both the options. Now I got my EC2. And then if you can do the console, I'm logged into the machine and say sudo su minus, and I'm a root user AWS. And the client is already installed in that. So you don't need, if you have used a machine with this one, you don't need a AWS CLI. If you picked up other machine like Red Hat or Ubuntu or something else, then you will need AWS CLI. So, but if you've already picked up a machine, this machine which is AWS, you don't need to do the AWS CLI. We just need to configure it. Now later in this part, this is one method of connecting. There's another method through PuTTY and using SSH keys, which I'll explain that in subsequent part of this video. If you don't want to, and if you already know how to connect, you can skip this part and move into the next lesson. If you don't want PuTTY and you're happy with this method of connection, you can skip this part. But if not, and if you want to learn and understand how to connect through PuTTY and do all these things, continue listening this lesson. And first thing is I need a machine IP address to which I'm going to connect. So click on that machine, and here you will have public IP and private IP. So ignore the private IP. You won't be able to connect to private IP from outside AWS. This private IP is only for within AWS. I'm connecting over the internet, so I'll be using public IP, and this is my public IP address here. Now, before I connect, I need a tool called PuTTY, which you can download from this site. So you go to this PuTTY and this website. This will give you the tool to download or install PuTTY. Now, if you are connecting from a Mac machine, then this step is not required. Mac machine by default comes with a terminal, which is a SSH terminal. You can use the terminal SSH connection. There is a separate step to connect from Mac. If you're connecting from Linux or Mac machine to this Linux, then steps are different. We'll put that inside the portal as well. But most of the users who come are from Windows background or connecting from a Windows machine. That's why we are going to download this PuTTY tool from here. So scroll down and say, you will see the latest version and say download from here. So it's download 0.76. Click on download it here. From here, now we scroll down and then we'll say 64-bit installer.msi. So 64-bit, and I think it's x86. So we'll be doing package file. Under package file, you'll be doing 64-bit x86. Most probably you have a x86 architecture, or some laptops might be ARM, but 86 is quite common. And you see installer.ami. You download, and this download will give you, or you can install that. I've already have this installed already, so I'm not going to install it again. So we'll cancel it. Now, before we proceed further, earlier we downloaded a key pair that has a public and private key. We need to extract the a private key from there, that key file. So first thing, as a part of this, you will download a as part of this, you will also download a puttygen. So if you start here and type puttygen, once you've installed it, so there is a puttygen get installed. Click on this puttygen, and here you will get that we are converting the key pair. From that, I'm extracting my private key. The key pair that we downloaded is applicable for Mac or Linux, but because I'm connecting from Windows, I need to convert this file or generate this file. So make sure you have RSA here and 2048, and then from conversion you say import the key or load the key. Sorry, you can have it say load the key, and in that you download, select all the keys, all files, and this is the key pair that we downloaded earlier under download folder, Red Hat OpenShift machine key pair, whatever key machine you've selected this. Select this and click on open. Now it's successfully imported the foreign key. The key earlier was in PEM format. The key we need is in PPK format for Windows machine. So click on OK. Now scroll down, and here what we need to do is then we need to save this private key. So click on say save this private key, and we'll say save the private key. It's saying, do you want to keep a passphrase? We are not. So we don't want to any passphrase. So we'll say that passphrase is nothing but a password on the key itself. So when you are using this key, you need to provide a password. And it's good for security reason, but I want to keep it simple. So we'll say, yes, I want to save this file without any passphrase. So say yes. Now it's asking me, where should I save this PPK file? So you can save it with any name. And we'll say that we are doing save this private key with a name as, let me see what name we are seeing. We'll say demo. So we'll say demo, and that's it. So I got a key which is in PPK format, save. And later I will need this key when I'm connecting through putty. So if I see now under downloads, I should have a demo. This is the key which I'm going to use. It is in PPK format. Scroll down. We have now created the machine. We've got our private key. Now we are going to start the putty, and we'll need this IP address. So we'll go back to my EC2 instance. Under here, I'll copy the private IP, sorry, public IP, and then I'll go and start my tool called putty. So double click on this and enter the putty, and I'll save this name something as maybe as a Red Hat OpenShift. So I'll save Red Hat OpenShift -2, so that later you can simply click on this machine here. Now, one more thing you need to do, you go to SSH and do authentication. And here authentication, instead of using username password, I'm using the private key that I created just now, demo, which is PPK. So let's say demo, select open. We go back here, click on session, and we save this key so that this key is being used. So we click on OpenShift 2 again, this machine or this IP address. Make sure that authentication is still there, which is my PPK file. Go back, click on and say open. So we have it's using SSH key. It's going to use SSH key. Click on open. Now, first time it says that key is not cached. Accept. You say yes, accept. Now here you're going to log in, but when we created a machine, we never created any user. So by default, the machine image that gets created, that creates a user called EC2, which is Elastic Compute Cloud -user. This is the default user that gets created, and hit enter. And if you see now authenticating with the public keys, or because we already used the key, we already got this console here. And now I'm logged into this user. Now I'm on this machine. So here I just want to change the colors. So we'll say change settings, and maybe I'll do the colors and numbers. So you can do colors, and here you say use system color. So I have white background and black text. Also, I want to do the fonts a little bit better. So appearances and fonts will make it a little bit bigger fonts. So let's see your font, and we'll say font size as 16, maybe or 14 or 16. Okay, apply. Now I have a putty Windows. I prefer this type. You can pick. It doesn't matter, to be frank. So now we have connected, and now I've logged into as an EC2 user, and I'm now ready to update my Red Hat Linux instance, because my Red Hat Linux was earlier it might not have the latest packages. So I'll simply say sudo su minus. Now, the good thing is, as I said, if you're new to Linux, I would highly recommend you to attend the bonus class, which is a part of this your program. So it's just two or three commands. Sorry, two simple commands. There are 2 or 3 lessons with the simple commands that you should be knowing, especially the VI editor. But if you need any help, you just do man, which is a manual, and sudo. What this sudo command is doing. So say man and sudo, it's saying execute a command as another user. And here, so I'm saying switch user. So I'm doing changing the user to my root user. If I don't put anything, I'm going to the root user. Well, that was me, Atul, from team K21 Academy on with the steps on how to connect to PuTTY onto the EC2 instance. So we created the EC2 instance and we were able to connect to PuTTY. Now in the next lesson, we are going to look at how to configure this AWS CLI. Now, because you have picked up AWS machine, or you have picked up the instance type as AWS EC2, then the AWS CLI already comes with that. But if you don't have, if you type sudo and then do AWS is not there, you can have this optionally, these steps as well on here. So let me show it to you what I got on the browser, and then we'll see AWS dash dash version. If it matches, fine. Otherwise, we'll update this or we'll use these. So we'll say AWS dash dash version. So it looks like it paused. So we'll say sudo su minus and then AWS dash dash version, hit enter, and then it's matching with this steps here, which is AWS CLI 118.147, 118.147. So we can skip that part, and that part is optionally. So I'll see you in next lesson. Hey there, welcome back. This is Atul from team K21 Academy, and let's continue from where we left. So we created a Linux machine that we're going to use to install OpenShift, or we'll download the OpenShift software, and you use this machine to create my OpenShift cluster, another subsequent master node, control node, or master node and or control plane we say, and infra node and worker node and so on. So I've already, as I said, if you have installed AWS, if you have installed or created a AWS machine with the type operating system as AWS Linux, then you don't need to do this step, which is AWS install. Skip that and already connect or move on to the next part, which is configuring the keys on this. So if you see on this, I already have this machine which is already installed, and I'm going to use AWS dash dash hyphen version here. Hit enter. This is already installed for me. So you can skip that part. We'll put it in optional. Next is we are going to create the keys. Now again, we did this in one of the other labs, which is configuring AWS using ROSA, which is a Red Hat OpenShift service for AWS. So if you've done that, and if you have the keys, you can use those keys. Otherwise, for completeness, I'm going to put that part here again. Fast forward that part if you've already done that. And then later I'm going to configure this. So we'll be creating a user, which is a developer user, or that will have a programmatic access. And then we'll create a group and then add this user to the group with the necessary permission. And then we'll get the keys, which I've already downloaded and I've already got that keys. So now I'm ready, and then I'll configure this CLI. So I'll talk about creating these keys if you've already done them, and if you have the keys, you fast forward this video and look at the configuring AWS CLI. Otherwise, continue watching that, and I'll talk about later part in this video or this particular lesson configuring the AWS CLI. So next is I need to configure this CLI, which means I need to create a user. That user will have administrator access, but we'll have programmatic or CLI access. So what you need to do, we go to AWS account and then we'll say identity and access management. We are going to search for IAM. In that, we go under users and create a user. We'll create a user. We'll use a name called K21 underscore OpenShift. You can use any name, but for simplicity and to follow, because we're going to use this name later, we'll keep it this name. And we need to select here and say access key programmatically and say yes. And then you're going to click on next permission, and you create a group called OpenShift, group name as OpenShift with the administrative access. And so we'll give that administrator access. And then next, finally, we are going to put a tag. I will put a tag, which is nothing but a description around this user we are creating, that we are saying, let's say OpenShift mode description. And once this user is created, we'll be getting a CSV. Make sure that you make a note of this CSV. You'll get access key and token. Now you will not be able to retrieve this token later, so make sure that you save it and then make a note of these user ID and or this account access key and token. That will be using it later when we ready to configure the CLI. That time we'll say AWS configure and we'll use that key ID and the token that we have used to configure this command line access. So let me first go to this here AWS account, click on search for IAM, click on identity access management or click on this IAM here. And under there you go to users. So the user that we created or when account is created in AWS, that's a root user. And then now we are creating identity and access management users. So we will say under users, click on and say add users. And let me go back and just wanted to make sure that we are using the right or same name. So I think it's K21 underscore OpenShift. So we'll keep it as a username K21 underscore OpenShift. And here we'll say access key programmatic access. So we select this access key programmatic and then click on next permissions. And this is where we'll say create a group. And I think the group name we are doing here is OpenShift here. So we'll say group as OpenShift. So group name OpenShift. And we'll give this administrator access. So this will have programmatic all access on AWS services. So from command line, I'm going to say create my OpenShift cluster and it'll create that OpenShift cluster because I have this admin access here. So say create group. This has this administrative access. Click on next tags and tag is more, as I said, descriptions will say OpenShift and click on review and say create user. Now this user, we need to make sure that we keep making note of this key ID and password. So I'm going to open a notepad because I'll need this a little bit while configuring. So this is my key ID and this is my secret key. So we'll right click. Don't save, don't try to do any configuration on this because I'll be deleting this password. So you'll not be able to work on this key again here. So make sure you download the CSV and save it as maybe underscore OpenShift key or something like that, OpenShift users, and say save it. I already had that key created, so I've resaved with a new or this key. So once we have the keys that we've created, we'll go and connect to this putty machine. I usually prefer putty because then I can copy paste. You can use the console that we showed browser based as well, but that means you have to type the whole command again. So make sure that we logged in as a root user, sudo su minus. I've already logged in. Let me exit out. And then this is what you'll be doing. You'll be logging as EC2 user. And then I'm logging in as or changing to root user, sudo su minus. I'll double check again AWS dash version. AWS is already the CLI is installed but not configured. And that is what we are going to configure now. So we'll say that AWS space configure, AWS space configure, hit enter, and then you will need the access key, the key that we created here now, the user ID that we created. So for some reason it's not copying. Yeah, and then I need the token as well. I'm changing this, so don't use my token. And then here hit enter, and then a region will be using default region is the region in which you created the machine, which is in my case US-East-1. And this is where my other cluster machines, everything will be created under US-East-1. So change accordingly if you're using a different region. I would prefer using US-East-1 because that's where I see that you have the maximum resources or better resources. Now default output format will use JSON, which is JavaScript object notation JSON. And now it's configured, or hopefully it should configure, it should work. So in order for me to test whether it's all configured correctly or not, I'll simply say AWS space S3 space LS, which means AWS S3 is a simple storage service. So I'm firing that command, simple storage service. Then LS means give me the listing of all the buckets or storage or the data I have under S3. So here I have a managed Velero backup. So there is a backup which is configured, or there are two folders here under on for me. So that means if you're doing it first time, you may not see I already have some things here. So just wanted to show you what I have under S3. I have some folders. Otherwise, you would see the blank. So I'll delete these Velero these backups, and then it will be blank. Otherwise, no need. You should be able to see S3 buckets here. And if you see now, these are two backups created on 20th and 27th, which is here. So which I did one of the previous works. So I can empty this bucket, and I need to type this whole URL and then say, oh, sorry, the text should have been the permanent delete, not this one. So I should have said permanent delete here and say empty. And then I'll go back to the screen, and then I'll do the same thing empty from here as well and say empty and type the word permanently delete these both two folders and then exit. And then now I can delete this whole bucket. So deleting a bucket cannot be done. That's totally fine. We need to put the name of the bucket. A bucket is nothing but I think of it as like a folder in which you have all the data. And so this is done. I'll be deleting the second bucket as well and say delete this bucket. And I'll copy this post. Again, you may not be doing this part because you don't have any data here. So delete the bucket. And now everything is deleted. Now I go and run this ls command, you will see blank. That's what we should be seeing in your case as well if you don't have anything on this. So that completes configuring of my CLI command line interface now on my EC2 machine of Linux. Next is where we will be creating or setting up the OpenShift cluster using a provisioned infrastructure. And for that, I'll cover what all things you'll be needing for that. So head on to the next lesson where we talk about or actually do OpenShift install or OpenShift user managed installer or user provision installer we call, or user provision infrastructure we call UPI method to deploy this OpenShift cluster. So I'll see you in next lesson. Hey there, this is Atul from team K21 Academy, and let's continue from where we left in the previous lesson. So we installed and configured the AWS CLI command line interface on a Linux machine. Now we are ready to set up the OpenShift cluster. So let's go straight to this chapter. So what we are going to do is, first of all, when OpenShift container platform install, it needs a public and private key to connect from the machine that you're going to use, or this Linux machine, to first create a temporary machine we call bootstrap machine, and from there it will connect to my master node and worker node. And for those connections happen using SSH keys, and it needs that key. So when we are configuring first, or we are creating a configuration file to install this cluster, it needs that SSH keys. So that's what we are going to generate this key. So first we are going to log into this putty. We've already logged in as a root user, sudo to the root user. And then we are going to run this command where we are saying SSH key gen. So first of all, any command that you don't know, you simply type SSH and then key gen. Anything which is operating system specific and you don't know, just do a manual page and it'll say that it's authentication by key generation, management, and conversion. Basically, it's basically used for generating the keys, managing the keys, and conversion of the keys. And then options T is what algorithms you're using. It's ED25519. And if you want to go further down, just put arrow keys to go and look for the option -T. And you can go up and down. And if you want to quit this file, simply type escape:Q and then it'll be quit. So T is, if you look at this option here, T will be that type of key to create. Its key is type of create. We are creating ED25519 and it's a new file. And if you want to look at -N option, you can check here on what this option N means. So it's a passphrase. We are doing a new passphrase, just double or single quotes. And then we're creating this file called ID_RSA. So I take this command and then post it here in this output here, hit enter. So I already have a key pair which I already created earlier, but I'll say yes, overwrite new one. And if you go to this will create under .ssh folder. Dot means anything file which opens with, or any directory opens with dot, which means it's a hidden file, so, or a hidden directory. Inside that hidden directory, if you see that ls-a, it creates a public key and a private key, and this public key and private key will be used later when we are create, or by the machines that are going to get created. So you can check the output of the public file. So id underscore rsa dot public, this is the output. And similarly, you can do the view of private file as well. This is the output of your private file as well. Now, once we have generated the key, we next is to we need to get the installation file on this machine, which means my installer of OpenShift. So I'll go to this URL. Sorry, I'll go to this URL and open in the notepad one more tab and go to install. And from here, I'll go to run it yourself. Inside AWS, I'll select the user provision infrastructure. And from here, I'll go to the download installer and I'll copy the link, because on this Linux machine, I'm going to copy this or download this installer on my Linux machine that I created earlier. So I'm on this install page or OpenShift create page. I scroll down under run it yourself, click on AWS. From here, you select the user provision infrastructure, because we are asking, or we are doing a user provision infrastructure. And from here, you download under Linux x86, right click on download installer, and then copy the link address. And this link will be using to download now our file. But before we download, we go to my machine, on Linux machine, and I'm creating a folder called under root user, or under root directory, I'm creating an OpenShift file folder, and we'll cd to this OpenShift user, and that's when we'll download everything. So I'll do cd, and I'll do then cd or make directory. So mkdir root, and inside that OpenShift. Now already had that file directory already. So you will not have the directory, but I already worked on this machine. So I'm going to move this whole thing here onto something else. Sorry, root, and then OpenShift underscore old. So I already had that OpenShift directory, so that's why I've removed it. And now I'm going to say again, make directory root OpenShift. And if I go under this directory root OpenShift, and now it's blank, there's nothing inside that. And that is where now I will download this file wget, or wget is to get the file, and then I'll output this, or the copy link that we copied, or you can use this, or whatever the latest version you can get it from. I'm using a OpenShift installer, or downloading those OpenShift installer. Once I get this OpenShift installer, I'll probably extract this using this command, which is tar xvf. Tar is basically untarring it. X means option extract, V means verbose, and F means forcefully. So if I do output, I have this gunzip format, tar.gunzip. So I'm going to untar it, or basically extract it, and that is where I'll get OpenShift install file. So if you look now, I've got this OpenShift installer from here. But before I do the install, I need one more thing, which I need a secret, which I'll do it again. I'll copy this secret, but one more thing I need to download. I need to download my client software, which means I need to do OC and OpenShift, OC and Kubernetes, which is OpenShift command line, which I'll be downloading from here. So first I'd say OpenShift client software. So I got one more zip file. And if I do ls, I got OpenShift client. So I need to untar this or unzip it, my client tar file. And if you do ls on this, you got two commands, which is kubectl and OC. So kubectl is Kubernetes command line or control, and OC is my OpenShift command line CLI. I'll copy these both under bin folder, user bin folder. So first I'm going to copy the OC, and I already had this copied this earlier as a part of this lab, just to test this all. So you say if you already have this, and if you're redoing it, say yes. Otherwise, you will be simply copying it. Same thing here for second, and it will again tell me that it's already there. So say yes, replace it. And now I should be able to run OC and or kubectl or kubectl we say. Sorry, kubectl, I can run it. Now I'm ready to install the CLI. So what I'm going to do in order for me to install the CLI, I'll need the secret, which I'll explain you later when I'm running it. So in order to install the CLI, I first need to create, oh sorry, next is I need to now, once this is unzipped, I need to now create a installation configuration file, and using that configuration file, it will install or installer will install it. So I'll first go to my, um, it will say OpenShift install. Using install, I'm saying create a install configuration file on under this folder that we have created. So do ls minus ltra. Last file is OpenShift install that we downloaded. So hit enter. What it's saying is I'm saying run this installer which I downloaded earlier and create a install config in this directory in which I'm running it. So it's asking me that first it needs a SSH key, where my SSH keys are. By default, it's set to none. So then using arrow keys, I need to move up. So I wanted to point, this is where we earlier downloaded this public key or created public key. So hit enter on that. Now here you can say in which platform you're installing. Are you installing as AWS, Azure, Google, OpenStack, and or accordingly. So we'll say that we want to do it on AWS. Hit enter. Now, this is important. Again, I've highlighted it. Now, what happens is if you select a region called US East 1 or any region that has more than 5 availability zone, and availability zone is nothing but data centers. So if you have anything more than 5, if you select any region which more than 5 availability zone, you are going to hit some limits, and those limits are NAT gateway and elastic IP. In order for behind the scene in cluster, we'll need to create one elastic IP and one NAT gateway per per availability zone, and that's tied to basically because there are number of subnets are equivalent to the number of availability zone. And again, these are all AWS concept. In a simple terms, if you're selecting a region which has more availability zone more than 5, you will have to request the or you will have to increase the limits of NAT gateway and increase the limit of elastic IPs. And hence, to avoid that situation, because that can take time. So, and again, if you want to know how to do it, there will be troubleshooting section. I'll refer there. But simple thing is we'll select US-East-2 because that has only 3 availability zone. That means all you need is a 3 NAT gateway and 3 elastic IPs, and by default you have 5 limit of 5, so you should be able to do all good. So make sure you select US East 2. I've selected, you can move arrows and select US East 2. Next is, and again, your CLI default, when you configure CLI, your the CLI, if you've configured with whatever region, you can still select here a different region. So we'll be selecting US East 2. Now base domain, it will automatically pick it from your DNS then zone that you've created, which was I created K21 Academy OpenShift 2109.tk. So hit enter. Now cluster name, this is where you will be creating an OpenShift cluster. So we'll say K21-OpenShift. You can pick any name here. Or I'm going to pick a K21 OpenShift dash. This time I'll say user provision infrastructure UPI. So next cluster name is done, and then hit enter, and this is where it will need the secrets, which means basically how to connect or how this tool on AWS CLI or AWS here is going to talk to my Red Hat cluster. So I'll say here copy the pull secret, and it's copied, and then right click on here and dump all the secret here and hit enter. And now if you see ls-altr or ltra, it has done, it has created a JSON file to install or tell us the state. It have also created a OpenShift install log file, and it has created a install config.yaml. And if you open the install config.yaml, this is the configuration file it's going to use when it's install the software. So what it's saying is we are saying API version is v1. The base domain is K21, this domain that we have selected here earlier, which is TK. This is my architecture for my compute or worker node, we say on here. and it's saying that there are three replicas of the this, and control plane is also three copies or three machines. Now, because this is a I am controlling it, we already have done, if you have not followed, we have already done a ROSA, which is Red Hat OpenShift service on AWS Cloud. There we, by default, it installs three. So I want to change it from three node master or three node worker to one node master and one node worker. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to come out of this file. You can do escape, colon, Q and exclamation mark. I'm quitting this file. Again, if you're not familiar with Linux basics like VI or what are these commands, how to use that command, these VI command, there's a bonus class about Linux, so you can look for inside the program. So I'm going to take a backup of this file, install config, and then say install config underscore maybe BKP or original or something like that, whatever name. And then I'll go and open this file and edit this file from replica from 3 to 1. So replicate 1. Similarly, if I go from here and replicas from 3 to 1 and then save it. Once this is file is updated, now I'm ready to install. So I've got the config file and I'm now ready to install the software. So in order for me to start the OpenShift installer, I'm going to run this installer. What I'm saying is OpenShift install. Earlier I said create config. Now we're saying create cluster, and we are creating a cluster -dir. So just to give you the background, earlier when we run this command, we said create install config. Earlier was creating install config, and now this time we are saying create the cluster, and we are saying directory pick up my configuration everything under this directory, and the log level is info. So control C and hit enter here, right click and let this installer run. So what is going to happen is behind the scene, it's going to create a log file under a hidden log file inside this, and it will be creating or installing behind the scene. Now it's running my Terraform scripts. Terraform is an infrastructure as a code infrastructure build tool, which is used behind the scene. So if I'll open a new more window here. So we'll create a duplicate session and then see while run the parallelly what's running. So we'll use login as ec2-user and then sudo su minus, and then I'll go to the OpenShift folder that we created. And inside that, if you see ls-ltra, it has created, if you look at, it has created now terraform.tf variable.json. This is there is a concept called variables in Terraform. Again, we have a separate program for Terraform or Terraform certification, Terraform associate. In that, we go deep into these topics. Then you have Terraform version, and then JSON file, state file, which will be telling what exactly is happening at this point on this. And this is the log file which we are interested on. So you can tail on this .OpenShift, and you will be able to see what's happening behind the scene for you. So, and then right now it's creating a NAT gateway, and it will be creating the load balancer, etc. So it's doing the networking part. And while it's creating, let me show you what's behind the scene, what's happening. So we can go to the AWS cluster now, or AWS console. So under AWS, first we'll go to VPC, Virtual Private Cloud. So it's going to create first VPC, and inside that VPC it will create subnets and so on. So under your VPC, so if you see, it has created a OpenShift UPI VPC. So it's created a VPC. Inside that, it will be creating the subnets, etc. inside that. Also, it will be creating the NAT gateway, as I said. So it will be somewhere on NAT gateways will be here. It's here under NAT gateway. So it will create NAT gateways. So it create three NAT gateways, one per subnet. And because there are three availability zones in this in US East 2, then that's why it created three subnets, and for each subnet there is a NAT gateway. And NAT gateway is basically any machine running on private IP. It needs to go to the internet, then it will use the NAT gateway to go out. Also, it'll create some elastic IPs or EC2 machines as well. So if I go to EC2, and let's see what's happening in our machine. So it's now creating a load balancer, and so first we'll see EC2s. So if you see now, it has created a bootstrap machine, and bootstrap is a temporary machine as we were covering earlier in the theory part. So it's created a bootstrap temporary machine and it's created the master machine, master node. And slowly you'll see master node will spin off a worker node and the bootstrap will be deleted ultimately or terminated by this installer process. You'll see some elastic IPs as well. So if you click on elastic IP, you got three elastic IPs, which is nothing but your static IPs, which will always be stayed here as long as the cluster is enabled. It'll also create the load balancers. If you go to the load balancer, so it'll create two load balancer, one for external for public facing and another one internal, which is internal facing. And then so there'll be DNS name, this name. Inside that external, we'll have my console URL and other URLs will be presented here. Later, you'll see it'll be creating or using our load balancers, etc. as well. Or the OpenShift console will be visible as we once this cluster is being created. So uh, now it's creating the DNS, etc., zones, etc. So give it probably around 40 minutes or so. Let me see in the documentation. I think it took roughly around 30 to 40 minutes. Or so 40 minutes, give it around 40 minutes. Last time, or it took me 28 minutes last time. So let's see how long it will take. 30 minutes. We'll come back onto this here. I've already mentioned to you behind the scene, but we'll see, look at final thing, what will happen. These, and once it's created, then it'll come back and start logging into the console. Also, we'll go and look into the OpenShift cluster here. It'll create artifacts under the OpenShift as well, under the OpenShift console. This cluster creation, you will be able to see this cluster in created in here as well in Red Hat console. So it'll come here right now. It's not registered. This is an old instance. So I have another one, but we'll come back. I'll come back to you once it's ready and visible here. So with that, just to do a quick recap, we have configured the first, or we created the configuration. Let me go back to the index page again. So we first created the, we first generated the keys. We got the installation program. We installed the OpenShift CLI and Kubernetes CLI. And then we created a installer configuration file and installed the cluster. It's running, in the cluster is running. In the next lesson, we are going to log in to the cluster. We'll check everything and then we'll probably be, I'll tell you about deleting or stopping services so that you don't get charged on the AWS account for. So we'll delete the cluster finally, and you can then create this cluster easily, which will show you. So you've done pretty much most of the commands now. All you need to do is next time just fire one or two commands that we saw and your cluster will be ready whenever you need it. So with that, this is Atul from team K21 Academy. I'll see you in next lesson. Hey there, so welcome back. So let's continue from where we left in the previous lesson. We were installing the OpenShift cluster, and if I look back now, the installation has completed successfully and it's saying install completed. It took roughly around 32 minutes. And now to access this cluster, we have two things. First, we need to export the kubeconfig. So kubeconfig is a Kubernetes configuration file that will gets created inside this. So if you want to do a list of or look at how does kubeconfig look like, this is a Kubernetes configuration file. So you can check it, and that will have the details like where is your API server, which will look into architecture. We have already covered inside the program in architecture. It's saying API version v1. I have the cluster certificate authority, and it has my where is my API server. So whatever the URL that we created earlier here, this is the DNS name we created, and then before that it's the cluster name, and before that API. So API dot cluster name dot whatever DNS name we created on 6443 port number. And so this is how the Kubernetes configuration file is. So in order for us to test everything, I've already mentioned about behind the scene, but let's go one more time on how does the behind the scene look like. So if I go back to the EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud, if I refresh the screen, you will have two now machines. One is the master node and the worker node. My bootstrap node is the terminated one. And this is where I was running this command OpenShift client machine. So we created a OpenShift cluster with two nodes here. I also mentioned to you earlier that it will create a load balancer, two load balancer internal, external. And there's one more which is created here for VPC, which is more for a classic type load balancer. What we are interested, it also creates a static IPs, elastic IPs, and the NAT gateway, etc. Now, in order for us to access this, one more thing, it'll go and create the cluster inside the OpenShift or Red Hat Hybrid Cloud Console by going to console.redhat.com/OpenShift. So let's look into there as well. So this is how you will see that your cluster is being, you'll see the cluster being created here. So you go under this console.redhat.com/OpenShift, the clusters are visible here, or that cluster that we created. If you click on this, you can from here, you can go to the console and open, you can click on open the console. And now, if you go further down, I'll come back to that open console in a minute here. Now, in order for us to log into the cluster, we'll be exporting this kubeconfig. So we make sure we log in as a root user. And there, I'm going to say export this file, which is kubeconfig, which is Kubernetes config file. And what I want to do is, this will be, if I leave it like that, if I log out and log back in, the environment variable will not be set or will be removed again. So I'm setting this entry kubeconfig in my bash RC so that when I log out and log back in, I should still be able to access, or the kubeconfig is executed every time I log into the machine. So now I can check my machine and say, or the OC space get space nodes. So this is also a similar command for Kubernetes. This is for OpenShift. I want to know the list of nodes that are visible in this cluster. So if you see, there are two machines. This first machine is acting as a master and second machine is acting as a worker. They were created 64 minutes or 1 hour, roughly around 1 hour back. I can do the same command for Kubernetes as well. So I can say, instead of OC, we'll say kubectl or kubectl if you're coming from Kubernetes background. So kubectl, and the same command, same output, master node and worker node here. And if you want to, in order for us to log into the administrator or like to the console, I first need the password of this, and this password will be given in this or stored in this file, which is under root OpenShift. There's a auth folder. In that there'll be kube admin password, and so this is the password here. So also I need the URL of mine, and URL will always be like console dot my OpenShift.console and then .apps dot the cluster name dot my the DNS name. That will be the URL. But for us to check, we can check and say OC space get space routes space -n means my namespace. This is under namespace OpenShift console. I'm grabbing the console here. So let me clear this and, oh, sorry. So hit enter, and now this is my URL, which is console.openshift. I'll pick up this, the dash console, and then apps dot, this is my K21 OpenShift UPI is my cluster name, and dot, this is my K21 Academy OpenShift dot TK 2119 TK, that was my DNS name. So I'm going to pick this and go to this URL. It's the same URL which I'm seeing here. And then here, if I hit, it will say that you're visiting an untrusted certificate. So now what I'm doing here is, I'll say show details, because the certificates issued to this URL is self-signed certificate. So I'll say show details, and here I'll say that I wish to continue, because the certificate are issued are self-signed certificates. So wish to continue, and now it's saying it's detected a connection and insecure. You click on yes. So here on the username, we'll use kubeadm as we saw earlier, the user ID and password. So we'll say kubeadm, and then this is the password that you should be able to see in your on your environment. So double check kubeadmin is the URL, the user ID. So kubeadmin is the user ID, and then the password that we created or we got it. We paste the password and then click on login. And now you'll be able to see this console, the OpenShift console. And from here, you can deploy the applications, etc. So if you see, this is my cluster overview. It's running OpenShift version 4.8.12. It's a stable version 4.8. and I have cluster control plane is a single master operator. We'll look into the operator later as we move inside the program. Now there you have two type of roles, admin role and developer role, or ops role and developer role. And later in subsequent modules, we'll look at how to create a additional user, and then grant admin or them a respective admin access or developer access. The user that we are using is a super user, that's a cluster admin, so that they can see both admin and developer roles. This is where you will see operators as we move forward. We'll see all the list of projects. Also, this is where you see all your workloads, pods that you're going to deploy, and other configurations as we move inside the program about deployments, deployment config, etc. You will also see cron jobs, schedule jobs, daemon sets, etc. These are all Kubernetes concepts, replication controller, horizontal pod auto scaling as we move forward. Then we'll have a dedicated module inside that will cover networking, services, routes, ingress, and network policies. We'll have another module about storage where we cover persistent volume and persistent volume claims. We'll look at builds, build config, monitoring, alerting, dashboards. This is where I have all my nodes or machines. And then user management. This is what I was talking about from security. We'll be creating users, give them a role-based access control, RBAC, etc. And then this is my cluster-related administration properties that we'll be doing if we need to set quotas, etc. Again, we'll go on each of these in detail in the respective modules. So just to continue from here. Now, if you want to check the logs, we already mentioned logs are under root OpenShift, and then there's a hidden file OpenShift underscore install logs. So let me show it to that one as well, just for completeness. So if you do ls minus a under the OpenShift folder we created, we can check OpenShift install log file, and it will list to you all the things that happen behind the scene. You'll see all the Kubernetes, Terraform scripts that it's going to run. So it's installer 4812. If you keep more forward, it'll give you all the things that it's doing, and loading certificates. It will be deploying all the Kubernetes components, etc. as you move forward. So let's search for API, to Cube API server, and then it'll be doing once. Let's keep forward, and if we go at the bottom of the file, that installation is complete. The settings that we saw, there's a console URL, there'll be passwords, username, etc. are given here. And then it's saying my cluster is setting up, it was done, it was waiting for it to start, etc. So you can look at the file to see or understand what happened behind the scene here. I've already explained you briefly here. Now, once this is done, once you've accessed, in order for you to make sure that ultimately it's creating two machines, so it's always recommended to delete this cluster so that AWS or you're not charged for this. Now, one option is you can shut down these machines on AWS account, EC2 machines. If you go back into the EC2, you can shut down these machines, but then when you shut down, you're still being charged for elastic IPs. If you shut down a machine and it's elastic IP attached, you'll be paying for that. It's always better to terminate it, and later we'll create it. So next time if we need to create this cluster, all we need to do is we leave the machine down, the client machine, which means the machine that we created earlier, OpenShift client, from where we deployed the cluster. But and next time if we need to create this machine, all we need to do is run this command, one single command that will install the installer, which is this command, which is OpenShift install, create cluster, and so on. Now, before you delete, make sure that you take a screenshot of the cluster and put it in our WhatsApp group so I know that you're performing these labs. It will also inspire others to perform this lab. So make sure you perform or share the screenshot. So now we're going to delete this. So we'll go to the same OpenShift folder here. So I'm on OpenShift folder, and then we'll say that OpenShift install the installer that we have, but this time we are saying delete, destroy the cluster, and then the configuration file. So I select this and hit enter. Hit enter, it will go and delete the cluster from here. It'll take around 5 to 10 minutes, and it will terminate all the things that we were seeing earlier. We also need to archive this cluster from the Red Hat hybrid console, which will show you once this is deleted. And finally, one more thing is, because we also created a DNS zone earlier in Route 53, so you have two options for that in deletion. Either you leave them running, or DNS you not running, but you leave that DNS. You only charge 50 cents per month, so it's very nominal fee. And because you've already used that one DNS zone, you'll anyway will be charged for this. Because you're going to recreate this cluster again when we are using to deploy, when we are going to deploy the machines, sorry, deploy the application and do some other labs in future modules. So I'll say keep it running, or leave it basically, or leave this Route 53. If you don't want that, or if you're completely saying I'm done with all the labs, then you might terminate, or you can always create this DNS zone later when you need it. So this is about zone. Other things about EC2, the machine that we created, you can stop that machine rather than deleting it. This client machine I'm talking about, the other master and worker node will be deleted, but this machine, you can stop it. So I'm done with this machine. I'm not going to use it. So I'll say instance state and then say stop the instance, because you only get 720 hours per month free in your trial account. And then we'll start it later if we need it. Once we need the cluster, we will start it again later. So this about stopping the instance. If you want to completely remove it, you simply select here and then say terminate instance. When you terminate, your whole machine and the underlying data, you can configure it to delete, and it'll terminate all of the things. Now, before we wrap it up this series about installing and configuring OCP, one more thing is any issues that you hit and we keep updating this guide, so it'll come under troubleshooting section. So we were hitting some limits or errors that was earlier, from the log file. We were able to see that it was saying initially saying that failed to generate asset platform check, missing quota. With the quota was, it was expecting six resources of elastic IP, where it was limiting to 5. Or later, um, we it proceeded further, or we increased the limit. Sorry, there was at other point we got this another error again pointing to EIP, which is my elastic IPs. So in either of the case, we were hitting limit. So as I said in one of the previous lessons, you have two options. You can either select a region which has less number of availability zone, which means less subnet, and which means less elastic IPs. So 3 elastic IPs, which is US East 2, and that's why we selected US East 2 for OpenShift. Or you can request an increase of limit, and for increasing limit, you can simply go shade above here. You go to service quota, and then search the elastic IPs, elastic space IPs, and then request the increase limit. So let me show it to you here and say service quotas. So we'll say service quotas, and from here we will see look for EC2, EC2 related services, because elastic IPs are associated with EC2. So we'll search for elastic IPs and we'll see EC2 VPC elastic IPs. Click on that, you have a limit of 5. You click on this and say request increase quota, and you can change here to 6, or which region in which region you want to change. Yeah, so make sure that you select a region accordingly. So that's in a nutshell about this whole thing, a whole setup. Just to do a quick recap on this in this whole module, we started with this guide covering OpenShift, like basically introduction to OpenShift. What are the two options you have okayed in OCP? We looked at deployment type, which is managed and unmanaged. We looked at installation type, IPI, which is installer provision infrastructure or user provision infrastructure, and then platform on which you can install. We looked at prerequisite, creating AWS account, subscribe to the Red Hat account, and then we registered a free domain name. We registered this DNS entry associated with NameServer in my Route 53 on AWS. We created a Linux machine through which we were planning to set up this whole OpenShift. We installed CLI on, or AWS CLI on this whole command line interface on the Linux machine, and then we set up the OpenShift cluster. In that, we first created a configuration which will be used later to create the cluster. We changed knowingly the node from three master node and 3 worker node to 1 master and 1 worker, and later so that it's for our own testing. We can later we'll have a subsequent module. In one of the subsequent modules, we'll be adding additional nodes on master node or worker node. We'll show it to you that as well. And then finally, we logged into the console. And in this, we deleted the cluster as well. So let me first go quickly and say, oh, because I've stopped, oh, I should not have stopped it before deleting. I forgot I should have stopped that properly, or should have deleted it. But anyway, I'll start it again and terminate it, this whole thing. I should have let the installer delete. Now there might be some entries, and so I'll run one more time this deletion, and we'll look into that.
Well, that's me, Atul from team K21 Academy, talking about OpenShift or installing OpenShift on a Red Hat Enterprise Linux on AWS Cloud. You can do it on any cloud of your choice or on-premise as long as you have a Red Hat Linux. Now, this video was taken from our OpenShift training program. If you want to learn OpenShift, which I highly recommend you, especially to run your containerized applications, we run a approximately 2 hours class, free class, where we talk about why the companies, or more than 50% of Fortune 100 companies, run or use OpenShift to run their container-based applications. Also, what the salary you can expect after learning OpenShift, or 8-week roadmap to go from complete beginner to learn OpenShift, including we'll also give a demo and 30 plus hands-on lab you should be performing. So URL, if you're interested to go deeper, k21academy.com/OpenShift02. Now, we always get excellent feedback on these sessions, 5-star rating, and I highly recommend you, if you're starting your journey or already working on OpenShift but have not earned good enough or not earning a lot, the free class is k21academy.com/OpenShift02, and I'll see you in the free class. Take care and bye for now.